So we'll touch on maybe the most important concept of Refine Core, which is the concept of a data provider. A data provider is where you define how your API, or any data source for that matter, works. So Refine knows where and how to fetch the data. Once it's set up, Refine Core will automatically call the right API for each page and give you the data. So you don't have to manually write fetch or Axios calls anymore, or set up PERN Stack query for automatic hashing, refetching, and so on. Refine Data Provider will handle all that for you so that you can focus on the business logic of the application you're developing. So let's implement a simple page and see how the data provider works in action to better understand and use it. Let's go over to our pages, subjects, list. This is going to be the first data point that we're going to work with. So we can also navigate within that page on our application. And let's wrap everything within Refine's list view. At the top of this list view, we'll render a self-closing breadcrumb component coming from Refine UI breadcrumb. And that's simply going to tell us where on the dashboard we're on. Right now, we're just on the home and subjects page. Then right below it, we can render an H1 that'll have a class name set to page-title. And it'll simply render the text of subjects. Now, you can see that I added this class name of page title, but that's not doing anything right now. And if you search for it, you won't be able to find any declaration on the rest of the code base. So this will be a custom class that we're going to define within our app.css. So if you head over to our app.css, below everything that we have defined right here, there we'll also want to add some additional class names, such as the .page title class name, where we can define different font size or something else. Since this is not a Tailwind crash course, and since these are just some utility classes, I'll provide them all for you within the video kit link down in the description. Simply find the codebase for app.css and copy everything besides the root, the dark, and the theme inline. These keep track of our theme, so don't override it. And I just noticed that I have the double layer base, so I'll just keep one and then paste everything from the app.css within the video kit link. There's not a lot of class names. You'll see that one of them is page title, which simply applies a font bold and a larger font size. Perfect. So now if we head back to the list, we can continue developing it. After the H1, I'll render a div, and that div will have a class name set to intro-row. And right here, I'll render another p tag that'll say quick access to essential metrics and management tools. So we can have it all in one place. Then below it, I'll render another div with a class name set to actions-row, and within it another div that'll have a class name of search-field, within which we can render a search icon coming from Lucid React with a class name set to search icon, and an input component coming from components UI input that'll have a type set to text, a placeholder set to search by name, a class name set to padding left of 10 to divide it a bit from the icon on the left, and a W full, so it takes the full width of the container. And it has to have a value. The value will be a state that we'll create within this page. So I'll create a new use state snippet. It'll be called search query and set search query at the start equal to an empty string. And don't forget to import use state from React. Once you do that, we can simply say the value is set to the search query. Of course, we naturally need an onChange as well, which is going to get the key press event and set the search query to be equal to the value of that key press. And just like that, you have a nice themed input. Now, right below the input and the div wrapping it, we can create another div that'll have a class name set to flex, a gap of 2, again, a W of full for the full width, and in small devices, W of auto. Within it, we can add a select element coming from components UI select, which is chat.cn. And here we'll be able to select the department that we want to get the subjects for. So that's going to be the purpose of this select element. So let's go ahead and create a new use state field that's going to be called selected department. And at the start, it'll be equal to all departments. Then we can head to this select and give it a value, same as we gave it to the input, set to the selected department, as well as the on value change, which can be set to set selected department. Perfect. Now within this select, we can render a select trigger component, also coming from components UI select, and within it, we can present a select value. Not coming from Radix, but make sure to import it properly from components. And it'll be a self-closing component with a placeholder set to filter by department. There we go. So now we have this little select that soon enough we'll be able to click on. Now below the select trigger, we can also render a select content. That select content will render a select item. Again, make sure that item is coming from components. It needs to be coming from here. And we'll give that item a value of all departments. So we can make it say that, all departments. And again, make sure to import it properly from components. There we go. So now it says all departments. Now, alongside all departments, we also want to render a list of the actual departments that we want to display. So let's create a list right here. It's going to be something like an array of computer science. Maybe we can do math, and maybe we can do English as well. But we don't want to map over these here. This is what I would consider data, not presentation, not JSX. So what I would much rather do is take this out and move it into the constants folder. So right within the source, create a new folder called constants. And within constants, create a new file called index.ts. Within it, we can create that array and export it. So export const array, where we define a couple of different departments. So let's call it departments. And typically when something is a constant, when it doesn't change, we can call it with all uppercase letters. And it's going to look like this. So we do CS, math, English. If you want, you can add more departments within this university. Now, we'll also have to map over these to present it in the right format to be displayed as a list. So I'll export const another variable called department options, which is going to be equal to departments.map, where for each department, we can automatically return a new object. So when I say automatic return, you have to have an object, but you first have to wrap it in parentheses for it to act as an immediate return. And then here you can define the value, set department, as well as the label set to the department as well. Now, back within these departments, we can just say department options, which you can import from the file we just exported it at, .map, where we get each individual department. And for each one, we can automatically render a select item with a value of department.value. And we can also give it a key, since we're mapping over it, set to department.value. And in the same way, we can render within it the label by saying department.label. So now you'll be able to see all departments, CS, math, and English, and we'll use this later on to filter the list of our subjects. Finally, let me show you one very cool thing. If you head below the select, here you can render one special button called a create button. Typically, there's not such a thing as a create button, but this one is provided to us by Refine. And if you render it, you'll immediately notice a nicely structured button that says create. And believe it or not, by default, it automatically redirects you to the create subject page. So this is what I meant when I said that Refine really makes the routing and the data portion of your application seamless so that you can focus strictly on the business logic. And now, most importantly, the goal of this page is to be able to display or list some data because we're on the list page of the subjects. So head below the create button and below all these three divs and render a data table that'll render a table called subject table. And of course, this is something that we have to define above because it's going to break the application right now. So let's define that subject table right here. Const subject table is equal to use table hook coming from refine dev react table. This is a hook provided by refine on top of react table, which allows us to fetch data according to sorts, filters, and pagination states, and then display that data accordingly inside of the table. And yeah, this is built on top of the React table package, which is now called PERN Stack table. To this use table, we can provide a type and say that the type of the table is going to include the subjects. And this is a type that we are yet to define. The best place to define those types is within its own types file. So right here within the source folder, create a new folder and call it types. Within types, create a new file and call it index.ts. Here we can export and create our first type called subject. It'll have an ID of a number. It'll have a name of a type string. It'll have a code of a type string as well, a description of a type string, as well as a department that it belongs to of a type string, and a created at field of a type string as well. And now we can very easily import this type right here by specifying subject type coming from types. And now we know exactly of which type will this table be. And now we can start defining the options of this use table hook. The first one is the resource. So which specific resource is this table showing the data for? In this case, it'll show the data for the subjects. And we'll nest this resource option within refine core props object, so we can put it right here. So that way, if you need some more information about a specific thing, you can hover over it and get more information about it. So alongside subjects, we'll also have the pagination, so how we want to paginate over those resources. We can set that to be a page size of 10 by default, as well as a mode, which is going to be set to server, which means that we want to paginate it on the server side. Then, if needed, still within the refine core props, we can define the filters, which for now I will leave empty. We can also define the sorters, which for now I'll also leave as an empty object. And finally, and most importantly, we need to provide something known as columns, which I'll add at the top. So these are the columns of the table that we are working on. You can see that the whole red squiggly line went away as soon as I added the columns part. Columns is simply an array that we are going to create. So let's start crafting them together. I'll first wrap it in a use memo hook coming from React. Now, why are we memoizing the columns? We're doing that to avoid recreating each column on every render. Then we can define the type of the data within that use memo, which is going to be a column def, as in column definition, specifically of a type subject, and it'll be an array of subjects. And then we can start defining a callback function of that memo, which will simply resolve in an array like this. And now within that array, we'll have different columns. Each column will have an ID. The first one will be the code of the subject. So we can say code. Then we'll have the accessor key, which is going to be the field name from subject data. And that I'll also call code. Then the size of the column, which I'll set to a width of 100. And actually, let's put each one of these into its own line, so it's a bit easier to see what's happening. And then we'll display the header. We can make that a p tag with a class name set to column-title and a margin left of 2, and it'll simply say code. So we're talking about the code for this specific subject. And finally, below the header, we need the actual cell data in the table. What will it show? Here, we can have a callback function where we can destructure the getValue property that's going to give us the value of the actual cell. And then we can automatically return a badge in this case, which is going to be a component coming from UI badge. Within it, we'll display a getValue and this will return the value of this specific cell. Since we don't know the type of the value, here we can say that the type will be of a type string. You can see that the use memo is complaining a bit, and I think that's because we forgot to provide the dependency array right here to the end of the use memo, which is going to be simply set to an empty array so that the columns never change. Also, we have a little note on the header that it's not expecting an element, rather a callback function that returns an element, so we have to define it like this. And now we have a single column within our table that'll soon enough display the data. You can see it right here, and the rest of the data is loading. So it's pretty cool that we immediately got this nicely structured container, which is fully mobile responsive, that soon enough will display the actual data with loadings, lines, hovers, and all the columns and everything else without ever defining anything in JSX. We just said data table, and that's it. The way that works is thanks to the data table component. When you're building admin dashboards, you so often need to display lists of data, whether it's posts, users, products, you name it. The data table component handles all the common table functionality you need, such as sorting, filtering, pagination, and action buttons. It's built on 10 stack table, as we discussed, which integrates directly with Refine's data fetching hooks, so you get features like server-side sorting and filtering without extra configuration. Thankfully, I already showed you how to set it up. You basically have to define the different columns right now, which we'll do right away. So let's continue with the other columns that we have. I'll collapse this one. The next column will have an ID of name. It'll have an accessor key of also name, a size of 200, a header, which is going to return the name, and it'll just be a column title. And then we'll render a cell, which will get access to the value of this specific cell. And this time, it won't be a badge, but rather it'll be a span element with a class name of text-foreground. And we will extract the value by saying get value, and it'll be a value of a type string. So similar to what we have done before. Of course, we don't yet have the data to show, but trust me, we'll have it soon. For now, we're just forming the structure or the skeleton of the table so we can display the data once we do have it. Specifically for the name, we want to allow filtering by name. And this is not easy to do in practice. I mean, it's not hard, but it requires a lot of manual work to enable filtering or sorting or searching. Here, it's super simple. The only thing you have to do is apply something known as a filter function. So right after the cell, I'll say filter fn and set it to includes string. This will enable text-based filtering on this specific column. Now, let's also add two more columns. One will be about the departments. So let's add a new object with an ID of department that'll have an accessor key of department, a size of about 150, a header set to the column title that's going to say department like this, and it'll have a cell where we can get access to the value. And this time for the department, we'll also display a badge. So I'll render a badge displaying the value with a variant this time of secondary. So this is just going to change the color of the badge. And finally, let's do the same thing for the last column in the table. And this one is going to have an ID of description about this specific subject with an accessor key of description, a size of 300 because it's going to contain more text, a header set to the description, as well as a cell of get value, and this time we'll return a span element. By the way, did you notice that I was just pressing tab the entire time? That's because as we're continuing to develop this, WebStorm is learning about the project and suggesting which code comes next. So here, we're basically rendering the description. We'll truncate it if it's too long and apply a line clamp to so it cannot exceed 2 lines. Perfect. So you can see now that we can also horizontally scroll across the table. Can't wait to actually fill it in with data. And now we'll just have to apply some filters to this table. Let me show you how we can apply the filters. We want to do it based on the departments and also based on the search. So I will collapse this columns part. and we want to deal with the filters and sorts. So to enable filters, we want to enable something known as permanent filtering. So I'll say permanent, and within it, we can define an array of different filters. We want to be able to filter by department as well as by search. So let's actually define these filters above, as it's going to be easier to then use them within the filters part right here. I'll say const department filters is equal to, we'll check if a selected department is currently set to all. In that case, it's going to be easy. We won't apply any filters. It'll be empty. But if a selected department is not all, then we want to have an array where the field that we're filtering for, specifically set to the department, we're looking for the operator of EQ, as in equality. So we're looking for a specific match as const, and we want to match it the following value of the value selected department that is currently stored within the state. So now we have these department filters that we can simply spread right here. So hopefully this makes sense. If the selected value is all, it'll return an empty array with no filter params. But if any other value is selected, it'll return the params with which the field will be filtered against. Then these will be passed to the data provider by Refine, which will then call our backend API with those parameter values and return the data that we need. Now let's also do the search filters, which is going to be equal to, we're going to check whether a search query exists. And if it does, it's going to be an array where we're going to have a field that we're searching for, and that's going to be a field of name. Then it's going to be an operator set to contains as const. And finally, the value, which is going to be the search query. Perfect. So now we have the search filters as well. And right outside of this array, we also got to say, if there is no search query, then don't apply any filters. Perfect. So now we can also spread those filters right here in the filters array. And just like that, we have enabled the functionality for filtering, but now we can also do the same thing for sorting. For sorting, it's going to be even simpler. We simply want to say initial sort, right? It's going to be set to the field of ID and in the order of descending, which means that the newly created IDs will appear on top of the table. Perfect. And that's it. You simply define the filters, you define the use table, and this will handle all the logic of fetching all the necessary data and then displaying it within this nicely rendered table, which is fully mobile responsive. But of course, now if it tries to fetch the data, it'll try, but then at the end of the day, it'll say 404, I wasn't able to fetch it, and it'll fail. And you can see just how well this looks like on the full screen. I mean, we should be looking at this dashboard more or less on the full screen because that's how dashboards are typically used. Not on small phones, even though it's good to know that it is fully mobile responsive by default. The reason why we get no data to display right now is because currently the data provider is pointed to a fake REST API. How do I know that? Well, if you check right here in our source, app.tsx, where we have the general refined settings, you'll notice the data provider options pointing to a fake REST API, which of course doesn't consist of any subjects within it. So for this subjects path, Refine is trying to make a call to this API, and then you can see that it actually works. It has a lot of useful data, users, posts, and so on. But what Refine is trying to do is making a call to this. And then, since we're on the subjects list, by default, it applies the / subjects part, which of course doesn't contain any data. Let's fix this by creating a mock data provider and connect it to the Refine UI. Right here within the source of the application, I'll create another folder, which we'll call providers. Within the providers, I'll render a new file called data.ts. And here we want to export and create a new data provider of a type data provider coming from Refine Dev Core to an object where in the parameters we get the get list functionality. And what this get list does is it fetches all the records used by use table, use list, and so on, so that every time you'll implement a list resource page, Refine will make a call to get list to get the data and pass it to the use table or use list behind the scenes. So this is going to be an asynchronous function. Specifically, it'll return the data of T data, which extends the base record. Basically, this is a type that is not yet defined. Rather, we'll specify what it is later on, so base record. And then we open up a function block that'll accept that resource and return of a type getListParams coming from refine dev core. And then all of that will return a promise that will get resolved in getListResponse coming from refine dev core. Specifically, that'll resolve in T data. So whatever we pass into it, that's how we'll resolve it as well. And then we open up a new function block where we can start defining this. This was a lot of TypeScript, I know, but we want to make sure that we're heavily typed at the start so that everything works as it should. And this base record, also we need to import from refine core. Perfect. Now, within this function block, we want to check if resource is not equal to subjects. Maybe it's another list resource, say classes. We have to handle this because every single call to this data provider will go into the get list, whether we're calling classes or something else. So if it's not subjects, in this case, we can return data, which is going to be set to an empty array as tData array, and the total, which is going to be 0 in this case, because there's no subjects that match it. But if it's good, we can return some kind of an object containing the data, which for now I'll set to an empty array, and the total, which I'll set to maybe like 0 for now. We have to fill this in with real or dummy data very soon. This data provider will also need other parts alongside the get list. It'll need a function called get1. And this one fetches a single record by ID. So let's simply mock it by creating an asynchronous function, which simply returns and throws a new error saying something like, this function is not present in mock data provider, right? We need to add this so that the refined data provider does not complain about throwing a JavaScript type issue. So we're simply throwing it ourselves, throw new error, and this has to be within a function block like this. And now I will duplicate this 3 more times, get one, then we'll have create for creating a resource, then update, and finally delete one. We'll implement all of these soon. Finally, there's a function called getAPI_URL that allows us to get the URL of our API as the name says. And now we need to generate some kind of mock subjects data that we can display within our table. So we could write it by hand, saying something like mock subject and write it one by one. But I think these types of boring situations are perfect for AI to help us with them because it can very easily and quickly create a lot of these mock data points. So I'll press Command-Shift-P and type in Junie to open it up within my WebStorm. We can allow semantic indexing, and I will give it some more space. Let's write a prompt together that'll generate this code. So I'll say create mock subject data in TypeScript for 3 university courses. Each subject should include an ID, course code, name, department, and a brief description. Okay, I think this should be good, and it should figure out where we want to include it. So you can see that now it's going to get the structure of our files. It's going to read through our code base and update the task. So the subject type and department constants are already defined. I will now create mock subject data in a new file and then render it right here. You can see that it actually created a new file containing these mock subjects, and then it imported it right here. And it did that within a couple of seconds. So mock subjects is now coming from constants. You can see them right here. It even gave them their type. And you can see CS 101, for example, for computer science, math, English with a description and everything they need. So now very easily, we can simply return this data from the get list of our data provider. Oh, look, Junie did that as well. So it's returning mock data as unknown as tData array and then it's returning the length of that array. Perfect. And with that, you've created your own mock data provider. Very soon, we'll connect this with a real backend, but for now, we're working with fake data, which is totally okay. So now head back over to your app.tsx, and where we have the data provider, we can now simply do it like this. Data provider is equal to the data provider, but not one coming from refine dev simple rest. Rather, we will remove that import and import it from providers data.ts. This is our own data provider that we've created. If you do that and reload, you'll immediately be able to see a list of subjects rendered within the UI. That's the beauty of Refine. You defined routes, you wrote the UI, you defined a data provider, and Refine handled everything from making calls, in this case mock data, but we will add an API call later, and then pass it to the right component page. Home is empty, but subjects fetches this nice list. And notice how it's instantaneous, so it's even cached and it's handled on the server. If you try out the search, you'll notice that right now it doesn't work. And that's because Refine uses server-side filtering and searching, which means that on the front-end side, Refine already implemented the search. And we can verify that if you head over to the Refine DevTools under Monitor and you switch a filter, you'll notice that a new use list request gets made. If you scroll down, you'll specifically notice that it's applying the filters right here under list, filters, and you can see department equals CS as in computer science. So it's properly communicating it to the backend. But the thing is that our mock data provider right now is stupid and it always returns all the data, so it doesn't yet filter it. But later on, once we implement our own full stack application and our own backend data provider, we'll implement the complete search, filtering, pagination, and more from scratch. So stay tuned. But with that in mind, we already have a lot of functionalities right here, so it might be good to push them over to GitHub. We can do that by either heading to the terminal, or you can use Ctrl-Shift-G to open up the Git terminal directly here within WebStorm, where you can check out on which branch you're on, and you can create a new branch from the main branch if you want to. So full Git functionalities are built right here into your IDE. For now, I'll show you how to do it manually as well by running git checkout -b to create a new branch, and we'll call it feat as in feature data-provider. This will check us out to the new branch, run git add dot, git commit -m, implement data provider, and then git push to push it over to the new branch, but we'll have to set the upstream to the remote branch on GitHub because right now it's connected to the local version. Back on GitHub, you'll see that we have some new changes. So let's go ahead and open up a PR out of those changes. There we go, implement data provider, create a new pull request. Now, if you properly connected CodeRabbit at the start by clicking the link down in the description, then creating your new account with GitHub, and within your CodeRabbit workspace, if you have added your repo, then you should get a message right here that CodeRabbit is currently processing the changes in this PR. This may take a couple of minutes, so let's give this rabbit some time, and then I'll be right back to review the changes we've made together with you. And the review's in. Let's see what the rabbit has to say. First, we get a recap of new features that we have added to our codebase. We introduce the subjects management interface with integrated search functionality and department filtering. We also improved the application styling with a component library for improved visual design. But now, let's get to the specifics. First, CodeRabbit gives us some nitpicky comments that we can fix if we want to, such as some better CSS class names, using static timestamps for predictable mock data, renaming func to function, and stuff like that. But where CodeRabbit truly shines is with the rest of the code review process. It shows critical issues. For example, it seems that we have a duplicate layer-based definition. I thought that we fixed this, but if I head over to app.css and check out layer base, no, it looks like it's still doubled. We have one here for the theme, and then we have one here as well. So we definitely want to get rid of one of these. Again, I was checking this file, but I completely missed that we have a double layer base. So we easily fixed this issue. Now, the next one talks about the use of our new data provider. It says that the delete operations on subjects will fail at runtime. The mock data provider throws errors for delete one operations. And since the delete button component uses the use delete button, clicking a delete button on any subject will trigger the unimplemented delete button method. Yep, this is indeed true. If you head over to our data.ts file where we're implementing the data provider, you'll see that the get one, create, update, and delete are all simply throwing errors. This is just for now until we implement the real provider. So for now, we can just skip this suggestion. And there we go. This is the part where we talked about filtering, sorting, pagination, and search. Right now, the current implementation ignores the get list params, which are all about the filters, pagination, and sorting, and always return the full mock subjects array. Yep, this is exactly what we noticed when we tried to filter the table a couple of minutes ago. So CodeRabbit is simply telling us these features won't work until you fix this part, and it tells us exactly where we have to fix this. Good to know. With that in mind, we are ready to merge. But before I do that, I'll just commit the change or the deletion of those extra duplicated class names in the CSS file by running git add dot git commit -m remove duplicate classes and git push. This way, we'll automatically get the change right here, and we'll be able to merge this now code reviewed pull request into our main branch. And this is why I love using CodeRabbit. It's a super quick and natural way to keep your codebase clean consistently, even if you're just working on a project solo, but it gets even more useful when you're working within larger projects within a team, so that it automatically gives your team some starting point to start reviewing the PR, such as what this PR is all about, what you're implementing within it, and which things might fail, so they can then check it further and suggest additional fixes. With that in mind, this PR has been merged. So let's check out back to the main branch by running git checkout main, and then running git pull to pull the latest changes that we pushed over into it. It's important that you do this because later on, as we start implementing other features, it's always important that you're staying on the main branch so that from that branch, we can continue branching elsewhere. Great. This was the first big lesson of the course. But in the next one, things will start getting even more interesting.